The Doha Agreement, also known as the Agreement for Bringing Peace to Afghanistan, is a peace agreement signed by the United States and the Taliban on February 29, 2020, to bring the Afghanistan war to an end. The 4-page agreement was signed at the Sheraton Grand Doha in Doha, Qatar, and published on the U.S. State Department's website. It was negotiated by Zalmay Khalilzad. The agreement provided for the withdrawal of all NATO forces from Afghanistan in return for a Taliban pledge to prevent al-Qaeda from operating in areas under Taliban control, as well as ongoing talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. The United States agreed to an initial reduction of its force level from 13,000 to 8,600 within 135 days, followed by a full withdrawal within 14 months if the Taliban keeps its commitments. The United States also committed to closing 5 military bases within 135 days, and expressed its intent to end economic sanctions on the Taliban by August 27, 2020. The agreement was supported by China, Russia and Pakistan and unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council, but did not involve the government of Afghanistan. India welcomed the pact. Despite the peace agreement, insurgent attacks against Afghan security forces surged in the 45 days after the agreement. The Taliban conducted more than 4,500 attacks in Afghanistan, and more than 900 Afghan security forces were killed. Due to a reduction in the number of offensives against the Taliban, their casualties dropped to 610, down from about 1,660 in the same period a year earlier. The intra-Afghan negotiations were scheduled to begin on March 10, 2020 in Oslo, Norway. The composition of the Afghan government negotiating team was not determined, because the results of the 2019 Afghan presidential election were disputed. The deal required the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners by the start of the talks, in a prisoner exchange for 1,000 government soldiers held by the Taliban. The provisions of the deal include the withdrawal of all NATO troops from Afghanistan, a Taliban pledge to prevent al-Qaeda from operating in areas under Taliban control, and talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. The United States agreed to an initial reduction of its force level from 13,000 to 8,600 by July 2020, followed by a full withdrawal within 14 months if the Taliban keeps its commitments. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg pledged to bring down NATO's numbers to about 12,000 from roughly 16,000 troops. The United States also committed to closing 5 military bases within 135 days, and expressed its intent to end economic sanctions on the Taliban by August 27, 2020. The Doha Agreement called for inter-Afghan dialogue and negotiations for a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire to start on March 10. The Afghan government was not a party to the Doha Agreement, and on March 1 President Ghani stated that he would reject the prisoner exchange, saying, "The government of Afghanistan has made no commitment to free 5,000 Taliban prisoners. The release of prisoners is not the United States authority, but it is the authority of the government of Afghanistan." Ghani also stated that any prisoner exchange cannot be a prerequisite for talks, but must be a part of the negotiations. On March 2, a Taliban spokesperson stated that they were fully ready for the inter-Afghan talks, but that there would be no talks if about 5,000 of their prisoners were not released. He also said that the agreed-upon period of reduction in violence was over and that operations against Afghan government forces could resume. Nevertheless, the negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban for release of prisoners began as planned on March 10, 2020. However, on the same day, Ghani also signed a decree for the release of 1,500 Taliban prisoners on March 14, but only if they agreed to sign pledges guaranteeing they will not return to battle. The same day, the US started withdrawing some troops, despite the fact that the terms of the peace agreement also received unanimous backing from the UN Security Council. Sources close to the Taliban, including Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen, afterward announced that the group had rejected Ghani's prisoner swap decree and still insisted on the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners. On March 14, 2020, Javed Faisal, a spokesman for the National Security Council, announced that Ghani had delayed the release of Taliban prisoners, citing a need to review the list of prisoners, thus endangering the peace agreement between the US government and the Taliban. On March 27, 2020, the Afghan government announced the formation of a 21-member negotiation team for the peace talks. However, on March 29 the Taliban rejected the team, stating that, "We shall only sit for talks with a negotiation team that conforms with our agreements and is constituted in accordance with the laid-out principles." On March 31, 2020, a 3-person Taliban